My left shoe stuck to the floorboards of a bar that smelled like bleach and cheap gin. 2 hours earlier, I had caught my fiance pinning my sister against a floral wallpaper we'd picked out together. Now, I was sharing a bottle of whiskey with a man whose tailored suit cost more than my life insurance. I didn't know he ran the city's underbelly. I just knew he listened when I asked if he wanted to ruin a wedding. Sweat beaded on the back of my neck. August in this city was a wet, heavy blanket, but the air conditioning in my apartment had been broken for 3 days. I balanced 2 boxes of wedding favors, tiny, stupid jars of artisan honey, on my hip as I pushed my key into the deadbolt. I didn't expect Arthur to be home. He was supposed to be at his firm, billing hours, complaining about his managing partner over a sad desk salad. I definitely didn't expect Lydia to be there. The front door swung open with a pathetic squeak. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the entryway. The sound echoed, sharp and loud. That should have been their warning. "Arthur?" I called out, kicking my flats off. The soles of my feet throbbed from standing in line at the caterer's. No answer. Just the low hum of the refrigerator. Then, a distinct rustle from the living room. Fabric sliding against a drywall. A sharp intake of breath that didn't sound like a startled gasp, but something entirely different. I rounded the corner, still holding the box of honey jars. They were pressed against the accent wall. The floral wallpaper we had spent 4 hours arguing over, a muted sage and blush peony pattern, framed them like a grotesque Renaissance painting. Arthur's hands were twisted in Lydia's blonde hair. Her back was against the plaster. His belt was unbuckled, the leather tongue hanging loose, striking the side of his trousers. For a second, my brain refused to process the geometry. I just stared at the brass buckle of his belt. It was slightly tarnished. I had bought it for him for his birthday 2 years ago. "Nora," Arthur choked out, jumping back as if the wallpaper had electrocuted him. He stumbled over the edge of the Moroccan rug. Lydia didn't jump. She just stood there, pulling down the hem of her silk camisole. It was one of mine. She always borrowed my things without asking. The box of honey jars felt incredibly heavy. My fingers burned where the cardboard dug into my skin, but I didn't drop it. Dropping it would make a mess, and I'd be the one cleaning it up. I always cleaned up. "The caterer," I said. My voice sounded thin, like it belonged to someone else standing down the hall. "They need an extra 1,000 for the deposit by tomorrow." "Nora, please," Arthur begged. He was trembling. His tie was draped over the back of the sofa, a limp blue snake. "It's not... We didn't..." "You didn't what?" I asked. The smell of Lydia's perfume hit me then. Vanilla and something sharp, like artificial citrus. It was cloying. It made the heat in the room feel suffocating. "You didn't finish?" Lydia let out a small, wet sob. It was an ugly sound, completely calculated. She crossed her arms over her chest, shrinking herself down to look smaller, more fragile. "Nora, I'm so sorry. It just happened. We were talking about the wedding stress and..." I looked at my sister. Really looked at her. Her makeup was perfectly smudged. She looked like a tragic heroine in a French film. I looked at Arthur, sweating, pathetic, desperately trying to thread his belt back through its loops with shaking hands. There was no screaming match, no throwing of plates. I felt a hollow, cold ache hollow out my stomach, scraping against my ribs. 3 years, the lease in both our names, the joint checking account, the save the dates currently sitting in 300 mailboxes. I walked over to the coffee table and set the box of honey jars down with a heavy thud. The glass clinked. "Keep the apartment," I told him. "I'll send someone for my things on Monday." Nora, wait! Arthur took a step forward, his hand outstretched. I didn't step back. I just looked at his hand. The cuticles were ragged. He bit them when he was anxious. If you touch me, Arthur, I will break your fingers. He froze. I turned around and walked out. I didn't look back at Lydia. I didn't slam the door. I just pulled it shut behind me, listening for the quiet click of the latch. The hallway smelled like old carpet cleaner. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and watched the digital numbers descend. 5, 4, 3. My chest felt tight, bound by iron wires. I wanted to cry, but my tear ducts felt full of sand. When I hit the street, the muggy air slapped me in the face. A taxi was idling by the curb, the driver smoking a cigarette out the window. I opened the back door and slid in. The vinyl seat was sticky. "Where to?" he asked, eyeing me in the rearview mirror. "Just drive," I said, staring at a stain on the back of the passenger seat. "Get me out of this neighborhood." He flicked his cigarette onto the pavement and pulled into traffic. I sat in the back, watching the city blur by. The neon signs flickered against the damp pavement. My phone started vibrating in my purse. Arthur. Lydia. My mother. I reached in, powered it off, and dropped it back into the depths of my bag. I needed a drink. I needed a dark room where no one knew my name, and where floral wallpaper didn't exist. The taxi dropped me off in a part of the city where the streetlights were mostly decorative. The air smelled of ozone and roasting garbage. I didn't care. I pushed open the heavy wooden door of a bar called the Brass Nickel. It was a dive, but not the trendy kind where college kids wore flannel, ironically. This was a place where people came to drink in silence and forget their names. The floorboards were tacky under my shoes. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and old nicotine, masking the sharp tang of cheap cleaner. I sat at the far end of the bar. The wood of the counter was deeply scarred, dark and sticky. "Whiskey," I told the bartender, a massive guy with a beard that looked like steel wool. "Leave the bottle," he grunted, setting a lowball glass and a half-empty bottle of generic bourbon in front of me. I poured a generous amount and drank it neat. It burned like battery acid all the way down, settling like a hot coal in my empty stomach. I poured another. The bar was mostly empty. A couple of guys shooting pool in the back. The dull clack of billiard balls, the only sound besides a jukebox, humming quietly in the corner, playing a blues track I didn't recognize. 10 minutes later, the stool next to me scraped against the floor. I didn't look up, too busy tracing the water ring on the wood. "Seat's taken," I muttered. "No, it isn't." The voice was low, gravelly, and entirely unbothered. I turned my head, ready to snap at whatever creep thought a woman drinking alone was an invitation. The words died in my throat. The man sitting beside me didn't look like he belonged in the Brass Nickel. He wore a dark, tailored suit that fit him with predatory precision. The wool looked soft, expensive. His tie was loosened, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone. But it wasn't the clothes that made me stop. It was his face. It was a hard face. Sharp jaw, nose that looked like it had been broken and reset, and eyes so dark they looked like obsidian. He looked exhausted, but not sleepy. He looked like a man who hadn't rested in a decade. His hands were resting on the bar. Large hands, knuckles slightly scarred, a heavy silver watch on his left wrist. He didn't look at me. He just raised 2 fingers at the bartender. The bartender immediately hurried over, pouring a specific amber liquid from a bottle kept under the counter. Not on the rack. He didn't ask for payment. He just nodded and backed away quickly. I stared at the stranger. The whiskey in my system was making me bold, stripping away the polite, cautious filter I'd worn my entire life. "You're overdressed for a dive," I slurred slightly, leaning on my elbow. He took a slow sip of his drink, his gaze fixed on the dirty mirror behind the bar. "You're drinking well whiskey like it's water. We all cope differently." I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Coping? Right. What are you coping with? Stock market crash? Bad tailor?" He finally turned to look at me. His eyes swept over my face, lingering for a fraction of a second on my messy hair and the tense line of my shoulders. He smelled like cold night air and a very expensive dry tobacco. "You have a ring on your left hand," he noted, his voice flat. "But you're staring at it like you want to cut off your own finger." "Fiance?" "Ex-fiance," I corrected, pouring myself a third glass. My hand shook slightly, the bottle clinking against the rim. "Caught him an hour ago, with my sister, against the wallpaper I paid for." He didn't offer a sympathetic grimace. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." I appreciated that more than anything. "Messy," was all he said. "Very," I agreed, knocking back the drink. The burn was fading, replaced by a warm, fuzzy numbness. "The worst part isn't even the betrayal. It's the logistics, the non-refundable deposits, the caterer, the venue, the florist. Do you know how much a custom 3-tier fondant cake costs?" "I don't usually deal in baked goods." "Too much," I told him, ignoring his dry tone. "And now I have to call 300 people and tell them the wedding is off because Arthur couldn't keep his pants on." The man turned his glass slowly in a circle. "Why cancel?" I blinked at him, my brain struggling to process the words through the haze of bourbon. "What?" "Why cancel?" he repeated, looking at me with a terrifyingly calm expression. "Keep the party. Change the groom." I snorted. "Right. Let me just run out to the street and flag down a replacement husband. I'm sure the line is around the block." He didn't laugh. He just stared at me, his dark eyes unreadable. "Maybe you don't have to go that far." Before I could ask him what the hell he meant, the heavy wooden doors of the bar crashed open. The sound was like a gunshot. I jumped, my elbow slipping off the counter. 3 men walked in. They wore cheap leather jackets, and the air shifted instantly. The dull murmur of the bar died. The pool game in the back stopped. The man next to me didn't flinch. He didn't even turn around. But I saw his posture change, the subtle tightening of his broad shoulders. His right hand casually slipped off the bar and disappeared beneath his tailored jacket. "Victor," the man in the lead spat, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. He had a scar running down his cheek and a hand tucked suspiciously into his pocket. "You're a hard man to find." The man next to me, Victor, sighed. It was a tired, deeply annoyed sound. "Not hard enough, apparently. I'm having a drink, Sal. Walk away. Boss wants a word. Now." "Tell your boss he can wait until Monday," Victor said calmly. Sal pulled a gun. It happened so fast, my brain couldn't register it as a threat. 1 second his hand was in his pocket. The next, a dull grey pistol was aimed squarely at Victor's back. I didn't scream. I just froze, my hand still gripping my glass of cheap bourbon. Victor moved with a terrifying, fluid violence. He didn't stand up. He simply swiveled on the stool, his hand snapping out from under his jacket. A deafening crack shattered the silence. Sal screamed, dropping his gun. Blood bloomed on his shoulder. The other 2 men reached for their waistbands. "Get down!" Victor barked, his large hand clamping over my shoulder. He shoved me off the stool. I hit the sticky, filthy floor hard, the breath knocked out of my lungs. Glass shattered above me. Wood splintered. The noise was absolute chaos. I curled into a ball, my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut against the flashing lights and the roaring sound of gunfire. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. It felt like an hour. When the shooting stopped, the only sound was a low groan from near the door and the frantic buzzing of the neon sign in the window. A hand grabbed my arm, hauling me to my feet with effortless strength. My legs wobbled like jelly. Victor was standing there. His suit jacket was dusty, but he looked completely unharmed. The gun in his hand was matte black and smoking slightly. "Time to go," he said, his voice as calm as it had been when we were discussing fondant cakes. I looked at the floor. Sal and his 2 friends were on the ground, groaning, bleeding onto the grimy floorboards. The bartender was nowhere to be seen. "Oh my God!" I choked out, a wave of nausea hitting me. "You shot them." "They'll live," Victor said, grabbing my hand. His grip was iron. "But the police are going to be here in 3 minutes, and you don't want to be sitting in an interrogation room answering questions about a mob hit. Walk." I didn't argue. I let him drag me out the back door into the humid, garbage-scented alleyway. The alley was pitch black, lit only by the red glow of a solitary exit sign above the door. The rain had started, a fine, warm mist that stuck to my skin and plastered my hair to my forehead. Victor pulled me toward a sleek, black sedan parked illegally near a dumpster. He yanked the passenger door open and practically threw me inside before jogging around to the driver's side. The engine roared to life with a low, aggressive purr. We tore out of the alley just as the wail of sirens began to bleed into the night air. I sat pressed against the leather seat, my chest heaving. The adrenaline was burning away the alcohol, leaving behind a cold, sharp panic. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What just happened?" Victor kept his eyes on the road, taking sharp turns through narrow side streets with practiced ease. "Victor Moretti, and you just sat next to the wrong guy at the wrong time." Moretti. The name clattered around in my head until it found its slot. The news articles, the whispered rumors, the Moretti family. Extortion, racketeering, shadows. I had just watched the head of a crime syndicate shoot 3 men over a whiskey. "You're a mobster," I whispered, the absurdity of the word tasting like copper in my mouth. "I'm a businessman," he corrected smoothly, checking his rearview mirror. "And currently, I'm a businessman with a problem." "A problem? You just shot 3 people." "That's a Tuesday," he said dismissively. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a cell phone, tossing it onto my lap. "Call this number. Tell the man who answers to meet us at the warehouse on 5th. Tell him to bring the paperwork." I stared at the phone, as if it were a live grenade. "Paperwork? What are you talking about? Let me out of this car." "I can't do that," Victor said, finally looking at me. His expression was grim. "Sal is part of the Russo crew. They saw your face. If I leave you on a street corner, they'll find you by morning to get to me. You're coming with me until I can guarantee you aren't collateral damage." I felt the blood drain from my face. Arthur's infidelity suddenly felt like a scraped knee compared to a gunshot wound. "I have to work on Monday," I babbled, the panic making me stupid. "I'm a marketing manager. I can't be collateral damage." A faint, dry smirk touched the corner of his mouth. "Dial the number, marketing manager." I picked up the phone with trembling fingers and dialed. A man answered on the first ring, breathless and anxious. I repeated Victor's instructions. 10 minutes later, we pulled into a cavernous, dimly lit warehouse. Stacks of shipping crates loomed in the shadows like monolithic monuments. A single overhead light illuminated a metal desk in the center of the room. A short, balding man in a rumpled suit was pacing frantically next to it, clutching a leather briefcase. Victor parked the car and killed the engine. "Stay close to me." We got out. My heels clicked loudly on the concrete. The balding man hurried over, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. "Mr. Moretti," he stammered. "Thank God, I heard about the bar. The Russos are making a move. We need to secure the estate immediately, or the feds will freeze the assets by 8 a.m. tomorrow." "I know, Leo," Victor said smoothly. "Do you have the documents?" "Yes, but—" Leo looked at me, his eyes widening. "You need a spouse to sign the transfer. The trust explicitly states the assets only pass to a married heir. You don't have a wife, Victor." Victor didn't say anything. He just looked down at me. The silence stretched, heavy and thick. The alcohol I had consumed earlier suddenly surged back, wrapping my brain in a chaotic, reckless fog. I looked at Victor. He needed a wife to save his empire. I needed a groom to prove I wasn't the pathetic, discarded woman crying over floral wallpaper. "How much of a hurry are you in?" I heard myself ask. The voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded dangerous. Victor's dark eyes locked onto mine. "I have about 4 hours." "If I sign it," I said, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, "do I get protection from the men you shot?" "You get my name," Victor said quietly, stepping closer. The smell of gun oil and tobacco washed over me. "No one touches a Moretti. Not the Russos. Not the feds. And Arthur," I murmured, the spite tasting sweet and toxic on my tongue. "My ex. I want him to know." Victor's jaw tightened. "I'll make sure he reads about it in the morning paper." Leo was hyperventilating. "Victor, you can't be serious. You don't even know this woman." "Do you have a better idea, Leo?" Victor snapped, never breaking eye contact with me. "Set up the papers." Leo scrambled to the metal desk, opening his briefcase and spilling thick stacks of legal documents across the surface. He pulled a heavy fountain pen from his pocket. I walked over to the desk. The paper was crisp, white, terrifyingly official. My hand hovered over the signature line. "What are you doing, Nora?" A tiny, rational voice screamed in my head. "You're marrying the Mafia to spite an accountant." But then I pictured Arthur's tarnished belt buckle. I pictured Lydia's fake tears. I gripped the heavy pen. The metal was cold against my fingers. "Sign on the dotted line," Victor murmured, standing right behind me. His presence was a solid, undeniable weight at my back. I pressed the nib to the paper and signed my name. Nora. Soon to be Nora Moretti. Victor reached over my shoulder, taking the pen from my trembling fingers. His hand brushed mine. Rough calluses, warm skin. He scrawled his name next to mine with brutal efficiency. "Done!" Leo squeaked, gathering the papers as if they were made of gold. "I'll file these with the judge tonight." Victor turned to me. The adrenaline was finally crashing, and the room started to spin. The edges of my vision darkened. "Come on, wife," Victor said, his voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. "Let's get you home." I took one step toward him, and my legs gave out completely. The last thing I remember before the blackout pulled me under was the smell of expensive wool and the solid, terrifying feeling of Victor Moretti catching me before I hit the concrete. Sunlight stabbed through a gap in heavy, charcoal-colored curtains, hitting me squarely in the eye. I groaned, squeezing my eyelids shut, and tried to roll over. My brain sloshed against my skull. My mouth tasted like I had been chewing on pennies and old sawdust. I was lying on a mattress that felt like a cloud made of expensive memory foam. The sheets were crisp, cold, and smelled faintly of cedar and starch. I opened one eye. This wasn't my bedroom. My bedroom had a water stain on the ceiling, shaped like a distorted continent. This ceiling was vaulted, adorned with subtle crown molding. Memories from the night before hit me in a disjointed, violent montage. Arthur's belt buckle, the sticky bar floor, the deafening crack of a gunshot. Sal bleeding, a metal desk, a fountain pen. My stomach heaved. I sat up too fast, clutching the thick duvet to my chest. I was wearing an oversized grey t-shirt that smelled heavily of the same dry tobacco Victor had been smoking. I patted my legs underneath the fabric. My underwear was still on. Thank God. A quiet click drew my attention to the doorway. Victor stepped inside. He had traded the dark suit for a pair of black slacks and a charcoal Henley that clung tightly to his shoulders. He didn't look like a man who had narrowly avoided a Mafia war and committed marriage fraud 12 hours ago. He looked like a man annoyed by a disruption in his morning routine. He held a white ceramic mug. He walked over to the bedside table and set it down. Steam curled from the rim, carrying the bitter, beautiful scent of black coffee. "Drink," he ordered. His voice was gravel, scraping against the quiet room. "You've been unconscious for 9 hours." I didn't reach for the mug. I pulled my knees to my chest, suddenly hyper-aware of how small I felt in this cavernous room. "Did we?" My voice croaked, dry and brittle. "Did we consummate a marriage brokered by a panicked lawyer in a warehouse while you were legally intoxicated?" Victor asked, his expression entirely deadpan. "No, Nora. I had my housekeeper strip you out of your wet clothes. You slept like a corpse." Heat flooded my cheeks. The embarrassment was a sharp contrast to the cold dread sitting in my gut. I reached for the coffee, my hands shaking. I took a sip. It was perfect, strong, scalding, and black. "The paperwork," I muttered, staring into the dark liquid. "Was it real?" "Legally binding in the state of New York," he confirmed, leaning against the doorframe and crossing his arms. The silver watch caught the sliver of sunlight. Leo filed it at 6 a.m. The trust recognized the union. The assets are locked. The Russos are furious. I set the mug down, the ceramic clicking against the glass tabletop. "I'm married to a mobster." "You're married to the head of a logistics empire," Victor corrected smoothly. "The rest is just aggressive negotiation." "You shot a man in a bar." He drew first. I call that self-defense. The police called it a gang dispute and swept it under the rug. Sal is in an underground clinic getting a bullet dug out of his shoulder. He won't press charges. Victor pushed off the doorframe, taking 2 slow steps toward the bed. "Are you going to be hysterical? If you are, tell me now so I can have the soundproofing checked." I looked up at him. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to crawl into a hole and wait for 2026. But beneath the hangover and the terror, a strange, toxic kernel of spite was still burning. It was the same spite that had made me sign that paper. Arthur had made me feel small, disposable, entirely replaceable. This man, terrifying and bloody as he was, needed me. "No hysterics," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. "But I need my things, my toothbrush, my laptop. I have to draft a Q3 marketing strategy by Tuesday." Victor stared at me. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a crack in his armor, a flicker of genuine bewilderment. "You want to go to work?" "I am a marketing manager for a mid-sized tech firm. I have a 401k. I have stand-up meetings. Yes, I want to go to work." He let out a short, rough exhale that might have been a laugh if he were a different kind of man. "You're a Moretti now. My enemies know your name. You can't sit in a glass-walled conference room and talk about click-through rates. You're a target." The reality of his words chilled the room. "So what? I'm your prisoner." "You're my wife," he said. the word sounding heavy and foreign on his tongue. Which means you stay in this compound, surrounded by my security, until I negotiate a truce with the Russos. You get whatever you want. Clothes, food, entertainment. But you don't leave without me. I rubbed my temples, the headache throbbing in time with my pulse. I need my clothes from my apartment, and I need to see Arthur. Victor's jaw hardened. A muscle ticked near his ear. I'll send someone for your things. You don't need to see the accountant. Yes, I do. I threw the duvet back, swinging my bare legs over the edge of the mattress. The floor was hardwood, freezing against my soles. He humiliated me. He ruined 3 years of my life. I am not letting some guy in a leather jacket pack up my sweaters while Arthur watches. I am going back, and I am taking my things. Victor watched me stand up. The t-shirt hung halfway down my thighs. I was a hungover mess with smeared mascara and unbrushed hair, making demands of a man who killed people before breakfast. He didn't argue. He just checked his watch. Shower, you have 30 minutes. Then we go. The water in the shower was hot enough to strip paint, and I stood under it until my skin turned pink. The bathroom was obscene, floor-to-ceiling black marble, dual shower heads, and a row of soaps that smelled like bergamot and vetiver. I scrubbed the smell of the dive bar and cheap bourbon from my skin, trying to wash away the memory of Lydia's whimpers. It didn't work. When I emerged, a stack of clothing was sitting on the bathroom vanity. A pair of black designer jeans, a soft cashmere sweater, and my own leather ankle boots from yesterday, freshly polished. I put them on. The clothes fit perfectly. It was deeply unsettling. I found Victor downstairs in a kitchen that looked like it belonged on the cover of Architectural Digest. Stainless steel, dark wood, an island the size of a minivan. 2 men in dark suits were standing by the back door, murmuring to each other. They stopped and straightened when I walked in. Victor was sitting at a glass dining table, scrolling through a tablet. A plate of untouched toast sat next to him. "Eat," he commanded, not looking up. I grabbed a piece of dry toast and bit into it. It tasted like ash, but my stomach desperately needed the starch. "How did you know my size?" I asked, pulling at the hem of the cashmere sweater. "I pay people to know things," he said simply. He tapped the screen of his tablet, locked it, and slid it across the table toward me. "Page 4. I picked up the cold metal device. It was open to the digital edition of the city's premier gossip and society rag. My heart plummeted into my shoes. Midnight merger. Moretti heir weds mystery woman to secure empire. There was no picture of me, thank God. But my name was there. Nora Hayes, a local marketing executive, reportedly tied the knot with the reclusive and notoriously dangerous Victor Moretti in a private ceremony late Friday night. "My mother reads this blog," I whispered, feeling the blood drain from my face. "Then she knows you married up," Victor replied, standing. He grabbed a dark wool overcoat from the back of a chair. "The Russo family reads it too. Sal's boss knows the trust is locked. They'll be watching your old apartment. You said we could go." "We are going, but you follow my lead." He stepped close to me, slipping into his coat. He smelled like that sharp, expensive cologne again. He reached into his pocket and pulled out my cell phone, dropping it onto the table. "You left this in the car." I snatched it up. The battery was at 20%. The screen was a chaotic wall of notifications. Arthur, 14 missed calls. Lydia, 8 missed calls. Arthur, text. Nora, please come home. We need to talk. It meant nothing. Arthur, text. Nora, where are you? I'm worried sick. Mum, text. Did you cancel the caterer? Why is Arthur crying on the phone? Call me. I stared at the messages, my thumb hovering over the screen. A day ago, seeing Arthur's name would have flooded me with warmth. Now, it just made me feel hollow. I typed out a single text to Arthur. I'm coming to get my things. Have the boxes ready. Don't speak to me. I hit send and shoved the phone into my back pocket. I looked at Victor. He was watching me with those dark, unreadable eyes. He didn't offer pity. He just offered a cold, structured reality. Let's go, I said. We took a different car this time. A massive, bulletproof SUV with tinted windows. Victor drove. One of the suited men from the kitchen sat in the passenger seat, a heavy bulge visible under his jacket. The drive to my neighborhood took 20 minutes. My apartment building was a modest brick walk-up in a transitional district, a far cry from Victor's gated compound. When the SUV pulled up to the curb, 2 more black cars were already parked nearby. 4 men in suits were standing casually on the sidewalk, smoking. Victor parked. They swept the block. No Russos, but keep your head down. I stepped out of the car. The humid August air immediately clamped down on my chest. I walked toward the front doors, Victor a silent, looming shadow at my side. He didn't open the door for me. He just walked slightly ahead, his eyes scanning the narrow lobby. We took the stairs. The elevator was too slow, Victor said. By the time we reached the 3rd floor, my heart was hammering against my ribs, but not from the climb. I stood in front of door 3B. The brass numbering was slightly crooked. I had meant to fix it for 2 years. I pulled my keys out of my pocket, my fingers trembling slightly. Before I could insert the key, the door swung open. Arthur stood there. He looked terrible. His hair was greasy, sticking up at odd angles. He was wearing the same dress pants from yesterday, but a wrinkled white undershirt. His eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot. "Nora," he breathed, his face crumbling with relief. He stepped forward, reaching for my arms. "Oh God, you're okay. I was so—" He stopped. His eyes finally flicked past me, registering the massive, impeccably dressed man standing just over my right shoulder. Arthur's hands dropped to his sides. He blinked, confusion warping his features. "Who is this?" Victor didn't introduce himself. He simply stepped past me, invading the small space of the doorway. He didn't push Arthur. He didn't have to. The sheer, predatory aura radiating from Victor forced Arthur to take a stumbling step backward into the apartment. "I'm her husband," Victor said. The words were quiet, but they hit the cramped hallway like a physical blow. Arthur let out a nervous, breathless laugh. He looked at me, waiting for the punchline. "What? Nora? What is he talking about? Is this a joke? Are you trying to get back at me?" I stepped into the apartment, Victor flanking me like a gargoyle. The smell of the space, my vanilla candles, Arthur's stale coffee, the lingering ghost of Lydia's citrus perfume, made my stomach churn. "It's not a joke," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I sent you a text. Are my things boxed up?" Arthur backed up another step, his eyes darting frantically between me and Victor. "Nora, please. You can't just throw away 3 years because of one mistake. Lydia meant nothing. It was the stress, the planning." "Don't," I snapped, the anger finally cracking through the cold exterior. "Do not blame this on the caterer, Arthur. You had my sister against the wall I painted." From down the hall, the bedroom door creaked open. Lydia stepped out. She was wearing Arthur's oversized college sweatshirt. Her blonde hair was messy in that deliberate, effortlessly chic way. She stopped dead when she saw me, her hands twisting in the fabric of the sleeves. "Nora," she whispered, playing the fragile victim perfectly. I felt a violent surge of nausea. I wanted to scream, I wanted to tear the apartment apart, but Victor was standing there, a silent anchor of absolute, terrifying control. I couldn't lose my mind in front of a man who didn't flinch at gunfire. "I don't have time for a family meeting," I said, looking away from my sister. I turned to Victor. "My clothes are in the bedroom. My laptop is on the desk." Victor nodded once. He gestured to the open doorway behind him. Two of the suited men from the street stepped inside. They were huge, silent, and intimidating. "Pack her things," Victor instructed them. The men moved with mechanical efficiency, ignoring Arthur and Lydia entirely. They brushed past Arthur, heading straight for the bedroom. "Hey, you can't just barge in here," Arthur protested, finding a meager ounce of courage. He took a step toward one of the guards. Victor moved. It wasn't a large movement, just a slight shift in his stance, a subtle angling of his broad shoulders. "I would strongly advise against touching my men, Arthur." Arthur froze. He looked at Victor's face, really looked at it, and whatever he saw in those dark, dead eyes made the color drain completely from his cheeks. He swallowed hard and backed away, pressing his spine against the floral wallpaper. I walked into the living room, ignoring them both. I went to the bookshelf and grabbed the framed photos that only had me in them. I left the couple photos gathering dust. I picked up my favorite ceramic mug, my noise-cancelling headphones, a stack of marketing books. My hands were shaking. I was trying so hard to project strength, to be the icy, untouchable wife of Victor Moretti. But I was just Nora, and my chest felt like it was caving in. I picked up a small framed photo from the end table. It was a picture of me and Lydia when we were teenagers, laughing on a beach in Florida. I stared at her smiling face. A tight, painful knot formed in my throat. My vision blurred, my fingers slipped. The frame hit the hardwood floor. Glass shattered, echoing sharply in the tense silence of the apartment. Arthur flinched. Lydia let out a small gasp. I just stood there, staring at the broken glass over my sister's face. A single tear broke free, tracking hot and fast down my cheek. I felt pathetic. I felt weak. I furiously wiped the tear away, hating myself for crying in front of them. A large hand appeared in my peripheral vision. Victor knelt gracefully, unbothered by the sharp shards. He picked up the photograph, brushing a piece of glass off the glossy paper with his thumb. He stood up and handed the picture to me, completely ignoring Arthur and Lydia. "Leave the glass," Victor murmured, his voice pitched low, meant only for me. "Let them walk on it." I looked up at him. There was no pity in his eyes, just a dark, pragmatic understanding of ruin. I took the photo. Okay. 10 minutes later, the guards carried 4 large boxes down to the SUV. I didn't say goodbye to Arthur. I didn't look at Lydia. I walked out of the apartment, leaving my keys on the kitchen counter, listening to the solid, heavy footsteps of my new husband following right behind me. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Victor's study, distorting the manicured hedges of the compound into dark, shivering shapes. It was Monday morning. According to my Google Calendar, I was supposed to be in a glass-walled conference room, pitching a Q3 digital ad campaign to a room full of board executives. Instead, I was sitting at a mahogany desk the size of a ping-pong table, wearing a borrowed silk blouse and staring at my laptop screen. "Nora, your audio is cutting out." My boss, David, crackled through the computer speakers. He sounded annoyed, his face pixelated in the small Zoom window. "Are you working from a coffee shop? It sounds like there's construction." I pressed the mute button. The construction was the sound of Victor's men tearing apart a shipment of crates in the driveway below, searching for tracking devices. "Sorry," I unmuted. my voice adopting that fake, cheerful corporate lilt I had perfected over 5 years. Plumbing issue at the apartment. I had to relocate. The click-through rates on the new banner ads are up 12%, but our conversion is stalling at checkout. As I spoke, the heavy oak doors of the study pushed open. Victor walked in. He was wearing a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. A dark purple bruise was flowering along his jawline, and his knuckles were wrapped in white athletic tape. The tape was speckled with fresh, bright red droplets. Blood. Not his. I stopped mid-sentence. David's pixelated face frowned. Nora, did we lose you? Victor didn't apologize for interrupting. He walked straight to a wet bar in the corner, poured 3 fingers of scotch, and swallowed it in one continuous gulp. The smell of copper, sweat, and gunpowder drifted across the room, completely overpowering the expensive cedar scent of the study. I'm here, I choked out, forcing my eyes back to the spreadsheet on my screen. I just think we need to A/B, test the landing page. Victor leaned against the bar, swirling the remaining amber drops in his glass. He watched me. His dark eyes were heavy, completely deadened by whatever he had been doing for the last 3 hours. He looked at the glowing Apple logo on my laptop, then at my face, pale and tense. The absurdity of the situation hung between us like a physical weight. I was discussing consumer engagement metrics. He had just come back from a turf war. "Wrap it up," Victor said. His voice was a low rasp. I fumbled for the mute button again, but not fast enough. "Who is that?" David asked, his voice pitching up in confusion. "Nora, is Arthur there? I thought you two—" "Arthur is dead," Victor answered loudly, his tone perfectly flat. My heart stalled. "He's not dead!" I shrieked at the screen, my hands flying over the keyboard. "David, it's just a joke. My contractor has a dark sense of humor. I'll email the deck. Bye." I slammed the laptop shut. The sudden silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain. I spun around in the leather desk chair. "Are you out of your mind? My boss is going to call the police." "Let him," Victor muttered, setting the glass down. He reached up and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked exhausted. The predatory stillness that usually surrounded him was frayed at the edges. "I need you to get dressed. We have a dinner in 2 hours." "A dinner? Look at you. You're bleeding." "It's not mine," he said casually, inspecting his taped knuckles. "And we are going because Carmine Russo requested a sit-down. Neutral ground. He wants to see the wife who locked him out of $50 million in port assets." My stomach performed a slow, sickening roll. "You want me to sit across from the Mafia and pretend I'm what? Happy?" "I want you to sit there and prove you exist," Victor corrected, walking toward the desk. He leaned over, planting his taped hands on the mahogany, trapping me in the chair. His face was inches from mine. Up close, the bruise on his jaw looked vicious, the skin split and swollen. "Carmine thinks you're a shell company with a heartbeat, a fake signature Leo forged. He thinks if he presses, you'll crack, and the trust will void." I stared into his eyes. They weren't cold right now. They were burning with a dark, terrifying intensity. "And if I do crack," I whispered. "You won't," Victor said softly. "You didn't crack when you walked into your apartment and faced the man who humiliated you. You broke glass and walked away. Channel that spite, Nora. Wear it like armor." He pulled back, the sudden absence of his heat making the room feel freezing. "My tailor left a dress on your bed. Be ready by 7. The restaurant was in the basement of a boutique hotel downtown, all exposed brick, velvet booths, and lighting so dim I could barely read the menu. We had the entire back room to ourselves. 4 of Victor's men stood by the exits. 3 of Carmine's men mirrored them. The air was thick with the smell of roasted garlic, expensive red wine, and pure, unfiltered tension. I was wearing a dark emerald slip dress that fit like a second skin, the silk sticking slightly to the sweat on my lower back. On my left ring finger sat a diamond the size of a crushed ice cube. Victor had shoved it onto my hand in the car. It felt heavy. It felt like a target. Carmine Russo was older than I expected. He had silver hair slicked back perfectly, wearing a suit that was a shade too shiny. He was eating a plate of veal piccata with terrifying precision, cutting the meat into perfect, identical squares. "So," Carmine said, chewing slowly, his small black eyes fixed on me. "Nora, a marketing manager, from corporate analytics to the Moretti family. Quite the career pivot." I swallowed the dry lump in my throat. I reached for my wine glass, my fingers trembling slightly. I gripped the stem hard to steady them. "My skills are highly transferable, Mr. Russo." Carmine let out a raspy chuckle, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. "Is that right? Victor, she's got a mouth on her. Better than the usual mute arm candy you keep around." Victor was sitting next to me, his posture relaxed, but his right hand was resting on his thigh, inches from the heavy bulge beneath his jacket. "Nora speaks for herself, Carmine. You wanted to see her. Here she is. Now, about the shipment in Dock 4. I don't care about the dock right now," Carmine interrupted, leaning forward. The polite veneer dropped, revealing the violent thug underneath. He pointed a silver butter knife at me. "I care about this sham. You think I'm stupid, Victor? You think I don't know you pulled this girl out of a dive bar on Friday night, just to trigger the marriage clause in your father's trust?" Victor's jaw tightened. "The paperwork is filed. The trust is active. The money is locked, Carmine. You lost." Carmine ignored him, keeping the knife pointed at my chest. "I did some digging, Nora. Your ex-fiancé. Arthur, is it? Little accountant. Lives in a nice brick building. It would be a shame if someone paid him a visit, maybe broke his typing fingers, all because you decided to play pretend with a monster." A cold, electric shock ripped through my veins. It wasn't fear, it was rage. Pure, white-hot, blinding rage. Arthur had destroyed my life. He had slept with my sister. He had made me a joke. And now, this greasy, silver-haired thug thought he could use Arthur as leverage against me? He thought I gave a damn about Arthur's typing fingers? I set my wine glass down. The crystal clinked sharply against the porcelain plate. "Go ahead," I said. My voice didn't shake. It cut through the dim room like a scalpel. Carmine blinked, the butter knife wavering. "Excuse me." "Go ahead," I repeated, leaning forward, bracing my elbows on the white tablecloth. I looked Carmine dead in the eye. Break his fingers. Break his legs. Burn his apartment down. Do you think I married Victor Moretti because I have a forgiving heart? Arthur is the reason I'm sitting here. If you want to handle my garbage for me, Carmine, be my guest. But don't insult my intelligence by pretending he's a hostage I care about. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigeration unit in the kitchen 2 rooms over. Carmine stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He looked at Victor, then back to me, searching my face for a bluff. He didn't find one. I was entirely serious. Beside me, Victor let out a low, rough sound. It took me a second to realize it was a laugh. It was dark, jagged, and genuinely amused. "You heard my wife, Carmine," Victor said, his eyes glittering in the low light. Send your boys to the accountant. But if you touch one crate on Dock 4, I will personally come to your house and drown you in your own swimming pool." Carmine threw the butter knife onto his plate. It landed with a loud, aggressive clatter. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floorboards. "This isn't over, Victor. The trust requires a legitimate marriage. When the board finds out you're paying this girl to warm your bed, the money reverts back to the streets." "Have a good night, Carmine," Victor said smoothly. Carmine shot me one last, venomous look and stormed out, his 3 men trailing closely behind him. The moment the heavy velvet curtains swung shut behind them, my adrenaline flatlined. I slumped back into the leather booth, my hands shaking so hard I had to hide them under the table. The air rushed out of my lungs in a shaky exhale. Victor turned to me. The amusement was gone, replaced by a heavy, dissecting stare. He reached under the table and wrapped his large, warm hand over my trembling fingers. His skin was rough from the tape, but his grip was incredibly grounding. "You didn't flinch," he murmured, his thumb brushing a slow arc over my knuckles. "I was terrified," I admitted, my voice a pathetic whisper. "You didn't show it. You gave him nothing." Victor leaned closer. He smelled like scotch and that dry tobacco. "You are a very dangerous woman, Nora Moretti." Hearing him say the name didn't make me sick this time. It made something dark and strange bloom in my chest. The drive back to the compound was silent. The rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and reflective under the orange glow of the streetlights. I stared out the tinted window, watching the blur of neon signs. My brain was misfiring. I had just casually endorsed the assault of my ex-fiancé to a Mafia boss. The moral high ground wasn't just lost. I had set it on fire. We pulled into the gated driveway of the compound. The iron gates locked shut behind the SUV with a heavy metallic clang. Victor killed the engine, but neither of us moved to get out. The dashboard lights cast a pale blue glow over his sharp profile. He was staring straight ahead through the windshield, his hands resting on the steering wheel. "I didn't mean it," I said quietly, the guilt finally seeping through the cracks of my anger. "About Arthur. I don't want him hurt." "I know," Victor replied, his voice flat. "I already have men watching his building. Russo won't get within a mile of him. You called his bluff, Nora. That's all that matters." I turned my head to look at him. "Why do you have men watching Arthur?" Victor finally looked at me. The shadows in the car made his eyes look like empty voids. "Because I knew Russo would try to use him. And because if anyone is going to ruin that accountant's life, it's going to be you, on your own terms, not as a pawn in my war." The absolute certainty in his voice made my breath hitch. It wasn't romance. It was possession. It was a violent, protective instinct that I had never experienced in my sterile, predictable life with Arthur. Arthur couldn't even pick a wallpaper without asking his mother. Victor had mobilized a private army to guard a man he hated just to protect my autonomy. I reached across the console. I didn't think about it. I just pressed my hand flat against his chest, right over his heart. Beneath the fine wool of his suit jacket, his heartbeat was slow, steady, and incredibly strong. Victor stiffened. His eyes dropped to my hand, then flicked back to my face. The air in the car suddenly felt too thin to breathe. "Nora," he warned. It wasn't a rejection. It was a caution sign on a cliff edge. "I used you," I whispered, the confession tasting like copper on my tongue. "In the warehouse. I didn't care about your money or your trust. I just wanted to do something that Arthur couldn't undo." I wanted to burn everything down. I know, Victor said, his voice dropping an octave. He lifted his hand off the steering wheel and covered mine, his thumb pressing into the center of my palm. We used each other. It's a business transaction. Is it? I asked, looking at his split lip and the bruised skin along his jaw. Victor didn't answer with words. He moved with that same terrifying, fluid speed he had used in the bar. His hand slid from my palm to the back of my neck, his fingers twisting into my hair. He pulled me across the center console. The kiss was not gentle. It was aggressive, messy, and tasted like scotch and adrenaline. It felt like a collision. I gasped against his mouth, my hands gripping the lapels of his jacket. He pulled me closer, his arm wrapping around my waist like a steel band, lifting me halfway out of my seat. The heavy diamond ring dug into his shoulder, but he didn't flinch. All the fear, the betrayal, the absurdity of the last 3 days poured into the space between us. I kissed him back with a desperate, feral energy. I wanted to forget the floral wallpaper. I wanted to forget the pathetic look on Arthur's face. I just wanted this, the overwhelming, suffocating reality of Victor Moretti. When he finally pulled away, we were both breathing hard. The silence in the armored SUV was heavy, thick with a new, dangerous complication. Victor rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. You are going to be the death of me, Nora. I thought you were a businessman, I breathed, my hand still tangled in his jacket. I am, he said, opening his eyes. They were pitch black. And I never lose an asset I've claimed. 2 weeks later. August bled into September. The oppressive heat broke, replaced by the crisp, sharp winds of early autumn. I sat at the kitchen island of the compound, drinking black coffee and watching the digital clock on the stove tick from 7:59 to 8 a.m. Leo, the balding, permanently sweating lawyer, was sitting across from me. He pushed a thick manila folder across the marble countertop. The trust has been officially recognized by the holding board, Leo said, tapping the folder with a gold pen. The Russo family has backed down. Carmine agreed to a territorial line at 8th Avenue. The war is over, Mrs. Moretti. I stared at the folder. And this is? The annulment papers, Leo said quietly, glancing nervously toward the hallway. Victor had me draft them last night. The trust requires you to be married to inherit, but it doesn't specify a time frame for how long the marriage must last post-inheritance. The assets are secured. You can sign these, and by noon tomorrow, legally, this never happened. You walk away with $5 million for your trouble, cleanly deposited in an offshore account. I picked up the pen. The metal was cold. It felt exactly like the fountain pen I had used in the warehouse. Where is he? I asked. Victor is in his study, Leo said. He told me to handle the paperwork. He said you have a life to get back to. I looked down at the documents. My maiden name was printed at the top. Nora Hayes. It looked wrong. It looked like a stranger's name. For 2 weeks, I had lived in this velvet cage. I had continued doing my corporate job remotely, muting my Zoom calls when Victor's lieutenants arrived to give their reports. I had eaten takeout with a monster at 2 a.m. I had changed bandages on bullet grazes. I had slept in his bed, at first as a barricade against the world, and eventually as something entirely different. I thought about my old apartment. I thought about Arthur, who had tried to call me 36 times in 14 days, leaving voicemails full of pathetic, weeping apologies. I thought about my sister, who had moved back in with our mother, blaming the entire disaster on Arthur's manipulation. I had a life to get back to, a predictable, safe, deeply boring life where the worst thing that could happen was a delayed caterer or a cheating fiancé. I grabbed the annulment papers. The thick legal stock made a satisfying ripping sound as I tore them straight down the middle. Leo gasped, clutching his chest as if I had shot him. "Mrs. Moretti, what are you doing? Those are legally binding drafts." "Not anymore, Leo," I said, tearing the halves into quarters and tossing the pieces into the sleek, stainless steel trash can at the end of the island. "Print out the Q3 asset reports for the docs. We have a board meeting at 11, and I want to see our profit margins before I sit down with those old men." Leo stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. You're staying?" "I'm his wife, Leo," I said smoothly, taking a sip of my coffee. "Someone has to make sure he doesn't shoot the shareholders." I slid off the bar stool and walked down the long, shadowed hallway toward the study. The heavy oak doors were cracked open. I pushed them wide. Victor was standing by the window, looking out at the grey morning. He was wearing his holster over a white button-down shirt. He didn't turn around when I walked in, but the rigid line of his shoulders betrayed him. He knew it was me. "Did Leo give you the papers?" His voice was rough, carefully stripped of any emotion. "He did," I said, walking slowly across the Persian rug. The font was ugly. I threw them away. Victor froze. He turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto mine. "Nora, don't play games. I am offering you an exit. You take it. You go back to your spreadsheets. You never look over your shoulder again. You stay. You are in this blood until you drown." I stopped a foot away from him. I looked at the man who had terrified me, protected me, and ruined me for any normal life I could have ever lived. "I don't want the exit," I said, my voice steady, stripped of the panic that had ruled me 2 weeks ago. Arthur made me feel like I was a background character in my own life. You make me feel like I'm holding the pen. I reached out, sliding my hand under his open collar, letting my thumb rest against his pulse point. It was hammering. "I'm not collateral damage, Victor. I'm a partner." Victor looked down at me. The icy, controlled facade cracked completely, revealing the dark, obsessive hunger beneath. He wrapped his hand around the back of my neck, pulling me flush against his chest. "Partner," he breathed, the word sounding like a vow. "God help the city." He kissed me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't worry about the mess I was making. I was right where I belonged, in the dark. What a wild, twisted ride. Nora traded a cheating accountant for a mob boss and ended up finding the darkest, most powerful version of herself. Do you think Nora made the right choice tearing up those annulment papers? Or is she in way over her head with Victor? How long do you think Carmine Russo will actually keep the peace? If you loved this deeply grounded, raw Mafia romance, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with a friend who loves their drama with a side of danger. Drop a comment below with your favorite scene, and make sure notifications are turned on so you never miss our next story.